Hey, soul survivors, we're going to talk about the narcissistic mother, also what happens to the scapegoat child, the golden child, and how a narcissistic father may act a little different than a narcissistic mother. So, excessive need for attention. A narcissistic mother may constantly seek attention and admiration for others. They can often talk about themselves, boast about their accomplishments, dominate the conversations, and in turn, they show little interest in other people's needs or um, what the child is accomplishing. They can also use the child as living vicariously. They're not really focused on the child and the child's need. They often have a lack of empathy for the feelings and the needs of their children. They can become dismissive or insensitive to the needs of their own children, and they may not show a genuine concern or support when their children are struggling. They just dismiss it. They let them work it through. They don't give them any coping skills. And a narcissistic mother can use emotional manipulation to control her children. She can use guilt trips, shame them, blame her children to get her own way. And she can often use this tactic, such as gaslighting, to distort the reality and make her children doubt their perceptions. And the mother isn't being her true self, and she's trying to force it, which is taking a lot of her energy away from her children. They also can be grandiose sometimes, have that inflated sense of self-worth, and they can just believe that they're superior to others, not listening to what other people have to say because they just feel that they're right. They don't take anybody else into consideration for their own thoughts. So people can't live their true self because they're not able to express themselves. So the mother who is narcissistic can expect special treatment and can often become angry or even hostile when her expectations are not met. Sometimes she feels that her children just need to be perfect, all needs to fall into place, that their emotions aren't true emotions. And boundaries. The narcissistic mother may have poor boundaries and may intrude into her children's personal space, their emotions or their decisions, and she won't accept her own child's autonomy. And often she will try to control their lives, even when they're adults. And this mother has a difficult time taking accountability or responsibility for her shortcomings or mistakes, and can blame other people, external circumstances for her own failures instead of admitting to them. Sometimes just admitting to what you did wrong kind of shows the other person that you're going to try not to do that again. But when you put it on external causes, you're the one that caused it, but you're saying something else did. It leads to confusion, and it also doesn't get that comfort that things will change. So favoritism and scapegoating. Narcissistic mothers love to play favorites among their children, showering one with excessive praise and attention while treating another with neglect and criticism. So some people think, she's doing this great job, but then she's treating the other one as a scapegoat. And she does that, like blaming them for failures, frustrations, that it's all the child's fault. And that puts a lot of pressure on the kid to overcompensate. So the favorite child, what goes on? What outcomes happen? So enmeshment, the favorite child will become enmeshed with a narcissistic mother, meaning that they're excessively bonded, emotionally dependent upon her, and they can feel pressure to fulfill the mother's emotional needs. And that's a lot for a child to take on. And their own sense of self may become intertwined with the mother's approval and validation. So they're going to, they're going to need that mother for that approval and validation. They're not living in their own true self. They're connected. So you get that codependency. They start to need external validation. They will have difficulty setting boundaries and a tendency to prioritize other needs over their own. And this is the outcome from having a narcissistic mother and being the favorite child. They can struggle with their own sense of identity and autonomy, as their self-worth may be overly reliant on the mother's approval. And it's going to be a lifelong thing that they need this validation for approval. And the narcissistic mother can use the favorite child as a pawn in her games to manipulate. She often will triangulate her favorite child against even the siblings, even against other family members. And she does this in a way to gain control or power over other people. Now, there can be some role reversal where the favorite child can be put in the position of being the caretaker or the golden child. And this child will be expected to fulfill every emotional need that the narcissistic mother might have or serve as her ally. So it can lead to the child taking on adult responsibilities at a very young age, and they sacrifice their childhood, their own needs, their own desires. So they grow up missing and not knowing what their needs and desires are. It just turns into validation. And the favorite child can often feel guilt, a lot of anxiety about receiving preferential treatment from their narcissistic mother. And this can happen, especially if they witness or are aware of the mistreatment or neglect of their siblings. If they start to see it, they might start feeling bad about it. And they can feel conflicted, often burdened by the mother's expectations, and they start to struggle with this sense of loyalty towards the mother and the siblings. So they're in between. Do I protect my siblings and lose my identity? And they can have emotional instability because of this. And it's just due to the unpredictable and volatile nature of the behavior of the narcissistic mother. So as time goes on, they become anxious, hypervigilant, overly focused on seeking the mother's approval. And this will impact their emotional regulation and overall well-being. And also it starts to develop interpersonal difficulties. The dynamics between the favorite child inside one of these narcissistic families can impact the child's relationship with others outside the family. And they start to struggle with forming healthy boundaries. They develop problems developing authentic relationships at a deep level. And they can have difficulty trusting other people as their experiences early on in life with the mother start to shape their perceptions of relationships in general. So what happens to the scapegoat child? They have a lot of emotional distress. They can experience it at significant levels due to being constantly criticized, blamed, and even that feeling of rejection from the narcissistic mother. They can have low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues as a result of the emotional abuse that goes on over time. So the scapegoat child, they can often internalize the negative messages and blame that's being directed upon them by the mother, and they start to develop a negative self-concept. They start to struggle with self-doubt, feeling unworthy, not deserving of love, and not feeling accepted. And this guilt, they start to feel it that maybe they're the ones that are responsible for the dysfunction within the family, even though it's not their fault. And what's really interesting, children are still developing, and they feel a lot of times when things go wrong that it had something to do with them. You see it a lot of times when parents get divorced. The kids think it's probably me. I was probably too loud, or I forgot to clean up my toys. That you know, they take on a lot. Just like I see it in the school when they don't process. Like if this one child always does really well. He's really well behaved and he tries to do good every day. And I have to be careful the way I say it, but sometimes, and I have to clarify it when I mess up, I catch myself, but I'm like, something like, you all are acting out. And he takes it as, like, you can see in his face, he's like, I'm trying my best. And he takes it as a personal attack, even though he should know, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to everybody else. You know, you were doing absolutely everything perfect, but they take on this. It must be me. It must be me. They don't separate that. So I got to be careful on that. That's something that I've gotten a lot better about. But we also have to be careful when we use always and never. Try not to do that because, if you say you never call me, they might have called you just not as much as you wanted. So role rigidity. The scapegoat child may feel trapped in the role of the family scapegoat, and this can affect their sense of identity and self-worth. They start to feel pressure to conform to negative expectations placed on them by the narcissistic mother, and they can struggle to break free from this even in adulthood, they feel it's their role, that they need to continue it. They can externalize behavior and as a coping mechanism for the emotional pain and frustration they have experienced. It can include things like acting out, being rebellious, engaging in risky behaviors, or developing unhealthy coping skills, which can include substance abuse, maladaptive behaviors. And the scapegoat child has a difficulty in trusting others. The mother should be the safe zone, and if the mother isn't safe, who is? So as their early experiences with this type of mother, it undermines their ability to trust and to feel safe. They may have difficulty establishing healthy boundaries, expressing their emotions, even developing a healthy intimacy. Resilience and self-reliance. Despite all these challenges, some scapegoat children may develop resilience and self-reliance as a result. They may learn to rely on themselves, develop inner strength, and cultivate coping skills that can serve them well in other areas of life. And that's why you'll see it where some people are healthy in a sense because they were strong enough to build themselves up and to know what they were worth. But it usually affects people pretty badly. So that gives you hope that, we can come out more resilient than we went in. So how are narcissistic fathers different than the narcissistic mothers? Now, there are some potential differences, gender roles and expectations. Societal norms and gender roles often influence how narcissistic mothers and fathers express these traits. So the narcissistic father may emphasize the achievement, status, financial success as a way to assert their dominance and superiority. But on the other hand, narcissistic mothers may focus more on the appearance, social status, relationships to gain attention and admiration. Parenting styles, they can have different parenting styles, such as the father being more authoritarian, controlling, or demanding. And then the mothers often we see use more emotional manipulation, guilt, and victimization to maintain this power and control. So it's important to realize that narcissistic parents can have overlapping behaviors, and both genders can exhibit similar patterns of controlling and manipulative behaviors. They have, the fathers do have that enmeshment and codependency. Narcissistic mothers may be more prone to enmeshment and codependency, where they over rely on their children for emotional support, validation, fulfillment of those unmet needs. And it can create a sense of blurred boundaries and autonomy. And this will have emotional and psychological challenges. But the fathers can also have this, but the dynamics may manifest differently based on the individual and family dynamics. So impact on children. The effects of having a narcissistic father or mother can impact children differently. So for example, children of a narcissistic father, they can feel pressure to live up to their father's expectations. They start to struggle with issues related to performance, achievement, perfectionism. Children of narcissistic mothers may experience emotional manipulation, guilt, emotional neglect, and start to have low self-esteem because of this, increased anxiety and depression. So there are cultural and societal factors that do play into this, certain gender roles. So, for example, in some cultures, traditional gender roles may shape how a narcissistic trait are expressed or even tolerated. Cultural norms and expectations around parenting and family dynamics can also impact how narcissistic fathers and mothers are perceived or judged by others. Sometimes certain actions will be written off as that's just what our society does, but there's a lot of damaging behaviors. These are the outcomes, and please let me know if there's anything I can help you with in your struggle to heal, because what we went through in our childhood does affect us. And if you have children, I'm here to help you too on certain ways that we can not overcompensate, not undercompensate, but be the right kind of parent, because there's a lot of things in hindsight, sometimes when you think you did the best you could, that do we set the boundaries? Do we give them consistency? Did we want to give them things that we missed out on instead of, because sometimes you'll give them too much and then they can become entitled because of that. So you think you're giving them the world, but they need certain steps that we have to go through. And sometimes we're just so caught up and anxious and excited about certain things that we don't realize, doesn't have to be over the top. We just have to be us. So lots of love to you guys. I'll see you in the next video. Just be yourself.